Welcome to Biztech's Leadership Conversation Show. Now, as Malaysian listed companies retool themselves in a post-COVID world, there's increased need to adopt more global practices across the board. Now, Reynolds Associates has just published, in collaboration with the Institute of Corporate Directors Malaysia, ICDM, and Bursa Malaysia, they've published a study on Malaysian board practices of public listed companies on Bursa Malaysia. Now, this study examines the effectiveness of prevailing industry practices related to board selection, the nomination and appointment processes, board evaluation, seeking to provide greater transparency and integrity in such an important part of a functioning corporate governance system in Malaysia. Now, today we speak with Stephen Langland, the Managing Director, Board and CEO Advisory Group at Reynolds Associates, to tell us more about these findings. Welcome to the show, Stephen.
Thank you very much. It's a privilege to be here, Brian.
Now, Stephen, let's start by you giving us an overview of what Reynolds does and maybe a little bit about its history.
Thank you. Russell Reynolds is now recently turned 50, one of the oldest and most established of the world's executive search firms. And for a long time of our history, it's been an honorable purpose of finding leaders and directors of boards and supporting leadership by finding new leaders. But much more in the new era, it's about advising on, well, the thing that says on our website as we boot up every morning, we're here to improve the way the world is led. And we really live that. And so now it's moving into services which are about the executive search, recruitment of CEOs, directors and executives, but now advising boards, coaching CEOs, supporting chairmen in really improving that single biggest risk and variance in their performance, the way that we're led.
Now, what is your focus area in Asia?
So in Asia, our firm is across all industries and government and not-for-profit. But my particular focus is purely advising boards, particularly chairmen and CEOs, on governance and the leadership for the whole organization, which increasingly today includes the full spectrum of environment, sustainability, social responsibility, and governance itself.
Now, so I want to zoom in on Malaysia now. You did this ICDM and Bursa Malaysia study together. It was about Malaysian board practices review 2020. And you basically looked at more than 100 companies that were listed on Bursa Malaysia. Could you kind of walk us through some of the key findings of the study?
Look, absolutely. And it was a privilege to be able to work with Bursa and with ICDM on this. Very much a seminal study. This we haven't seen nations do. And the first thing I want to say is a big hats off to Malaysia's boards for saying we want to talk about this. For too long, we've seen boards around the world, nations' governance mindsets based on a thing called legitimacy, which is people going on boards because it looks legitimate that they do. They've been a CEO, they've been an excellent lawyer, accountant, a politician. So legitimately, I am effective on a board. But that doesn't talk about competence. It doesn't talk about the capability. It doesn't talk about the development and the dynamic of that board, which really makes it successful. And so this study was asking boards that question. What are we doing that enhances the capability of our boards, not just the structure and the list of names that are on our board? So the findings were very intimate and asking people to judge themselves on where they stand on driving that effectiveness, how they're evaluating themselves, how they're recruiting, how they're developing, and how, at the headline, are they making their boards better led. And so the study's detail brings this out and looks at all those factors.
Now, let me zoom in on some aspects of the board. One of the things is about board composition and recruitment. And 74% of Malaysian boards were actually sourced by personal network referrals. So essentially what that basically kind of highlights is the fact it's pretty much an old boys network.
Yes, we could say, but actually this isn't unusual. Whilst firms like ours, at Russell Reynolds, we're proud of appointing more than 600 directors on boards a year. That probably accounts for less than 8% of these appointments. It is normal that boards, because of a concept of trust, of familiarity, of understanding the ability to bring competence in, very common, the world's boards are based on networks and the sources and the people that are known by the current board. 74% actually Malaysia, well actually that's not too bad, because we've still got quite a few here that are coming from other nominations or independent search. 8% coming from independent search or other institutions, that's a healthy figure. So yes, it appears, does this look like it's churning an old boys network? It doesn't necessarily mean that, unless there aren't criteria by which you're selecting on. And I think that's the thing we should be talking about.
Now, the best practice recommended by the Malaysian Code on Corporate Governance is actually third-party independent search. And so you say 8% is still a good number. What is preventing companies then from using third-party sources like yourselves even more? Is there a cost issue? Because traditionally, if you do a search, somebody like Russell Reynolds would probably charge about a third of the annual compensation of a senior executive. What sort of charges then are incurred when you do a board search?
Yeah, I mean, for director appointments, the formula isn't 33% of compensation like traditionally the industry has. For director appointments, it tends to be a very fixed fee. And so we bypass the issue of it being expensive or being something which is overweighted in the factor. I think it's about something different, and our research has shown us that it is something different. Up until the recent era, we've had a mindset, boards and the industry of a mindset which is replacement of a retiring director. We look at the board, one of the directors is retiring next year, how do we replace that empty chair? And the model of replacement has massively skewed to a model of succession. And this is what's changing the industry. So that what I mean by that is, rather than saying, who else do we need on the board today? The really elite boards, and we're seeing it increasingly in Malaysia and Singapore, are saying, what does this board need to look like 5 years from now if it's going to get an A grade from all of its stakeholders? And let's start to plan for that 5-year ideal board. My own clients in the US boards call it the avatar board. Okay. Not us, but what would it look like? And now let's start recruiting for purpose, skills, experiences, network, knowledge, competence, style, because we're designing something that needs to get an A grade tomorrow, not today. And that's what's making the recruitment side of appointments to boards far more forensic than we've ever seen.
Okay, so Stephen, that avatar of boards is a very interesting concept, because especially post-COVID, companies have had to completely retool. And if you look at, if they looked across the rooms, many of them, and we interview them on Biztech, they themselves acknowledge we don't have the skill sets in the boards, and this is what the challenges that we're doing with. We have to deal with. It's branding and marketing, because it's digital marketing. How do we then retool and brand ourselves and our products better? That's one skills gap that comes out a lot. The second thing, of course, which is a very obvious thing, is technology. How do we then be agile enough to adopt technology? Because traditionally, all we've done is we've asked the chief technology officer to come in and advise us on what to do.
Yes, I mean, to start with the COVID point, COVID drew attention to this extraordinary rapid change in the demand for new competencies on board. But it was just the straw that broke the back. This was already happening. And if we just invoke the pestle model that most boards would use to talk about turbulence in their external environment, what's happened over the last 2 years simultaneously to COVID is extraordinary change politically, geopolitically, economically, socially, technologically, legally, environmentally. And so we've got on top of that, yes, COVID has accelerated change. So boards, the really elite boards have said, what got us successful can't keep us successful. Now, how do we adapt and learn the skills? So let's come to that point you made about technology. We've seen an era over the last 5 years where technology appointments to boards have had a high level of failure. Because what were we looking for? So the reason behind that is, what were we looking for? Do we just get an executive out of Google? Do we just get an executive out of Microsoft, out of Cisco? The face validity of that's a technology person. Do we get ex-CIOs? Do we get technology consultants? But actually, that's not what they were looking for. And the boards that we at Russell Reynolds now are very much proud of helping build with multiple appointments over multiple years, they wouldn't use the word technology. They'd be using the word transformation, of which technology is a primary measure of. So we've moved away from find me a digital director. I'm not sure anyone knows what that means. I certainly don't. Find me a technology director, as if it's some kind of placebo. Coming back to leadership, can we transform organizations through a mechanism that's technology? Not do we have people who understand code? And so we're learning about this board skills transformation, often through mistakes of difficult hires.
Now, the other thing that is that stands out for me in the study is actually the fact that 19% of independent board directors in Malaysia have been in their boards for more than 9 years. Now, that sends a lot of alarm bells. I mean, could you kind of highlight some of the challenges there and also what the global best practices are?
Yes. Look, again, this is appropriate governance, regulatory coverage. This is appropriate measures. The purpose of a board isn't just to be an expert witness to what management's doing. There's two purposes of a board: conformance and performance. Conform, let's make sure a board is doing its job right. We need to be independent. We need to show that we don't have a vested interest in not looking for compliance issues. But the other half of a board is performance. What are we doing that helps the company succeed? And we're finding around the world big skews in misbalance between those two tasks and identities on a board. So this aspect of independence is being hotly debated in India, in China, in Japan, in Australia, because it's a word that says, I do not have a personal vested interest, and therefore I am, with honor and integrity, able to challenge this company. So if I've been part of this organization, if my identity, my self-esteem has been the success of this organization, well, one hypothesis is the longer I stay, the harder it is for me to be associated with failure. So the rule about tenure makes sense, but it's much more about the intent of directors. And can we performance manage directors in a way that makes tenure a far less effective means of judging trust?
And globally then, or if we benchmark ourselves against regional peers, say with best practices in Singapore, in Hong Kong, what is really the sweet spot in terms of a tenure for an independent director?
I mean, first of all, most of the oldest governance structures and regimes in the world have initially had rules saying the board needs to be 50% independent. Well, that makes sense, that we've got those that are very much embedded in the success and the understanding and the workings of the organization, and those that are much more removed from that. So 50%.
ICDM did a Malaysian study actually and looked at 2017 to 2019 Bursa Malaysia companies. Just to zoom in on what you just said about 50% board should be non-executive. The companies which had 30 to 50% of their board members as non-executives had between 28 and 29% better PE ratios and ROI than their equivalent peers. So having diversity and having basically a more independent board translates strictly to bottom line and also value of the company.
Yes, and that's been proven across economies and nations and different industries and backgrounds. But it makes sense, again, the more diverse a board is, and when I say diversity, this isn't quotas. This isn't, have we got 10% of this type of person and 5% of this type of person? It's, does the board think with what we often hear the phrase, with constructive dissent? Does the board challenge? Does it think differently? Diversity on the board is about bringing the broadest spectrum of thought and belief and attitude and argument to a decision of that organization. It's not meant to look like United Nations. It's not meant to look like that it's representing a population. It's got to do a job. And so where we have true diversity, where we've got people who are really thinking and challenging and enjoying conflict and challenge in that board meeting, then we do have these extraordinary sustained improvements in performance. So, and I think this is to encourage it.
Stephen, from a Malaysian context, then in that same study,
yeah.
Companies which basically had at least 3 cultures on their boards performed 30% better than their peers. Those that had more international experience on their board had between 40 and 45% better performance. One of the things, obviously, within a Malaysian context, which is probably not as obvious in Singapore, is the fact that the Malaysian boards tend to be less international compared to their Singaporean peers, for example.
Yes, I mean, I think the analysis that you're showing, we're showing is even deeper and broader. We've just finished at Russell Reynolds a collaborative piece of work with the United Nations Global Compact, which has looked at boards in Malaysia and Indonesia and Southeast Asia and globally for how this correlates not just to performance, but to them achieving sustainability goals. And so when you look at this idea of international coverage, I think we've got 2 ways. We either have a board which clearly is internationally diverse, or we have a board that knows to ask those questions, that knows to involve expertise, that knows to have an internationally diverse executive team. Increasingly now in Southeast Asian boards and Australian boards, the idea of seconded guest directors on subcommittees is very common, where we start to be able to seed this thinking. But yeah, where we've got, it's again, not unusual. If you look at the boards in Australia, they're dominated by Australians. In fact, for a country that's dependent on its economic connection to Asia, it almost has no Asian directors on boards now. So I think the intent of Malaysian's boards to project internationally is one of the best in the region.
So that's quite an interesting concept in terms of guest board members and subcommittees. Have you seen that across the region as something that perhaps could take off?
Yes, I think that there's a lot of mythology about the rules that define what a board is and isn't allowed to do. And often where we're supporting a board, we're helping a board develop, or we're evaluating a board, we're hearing a board say, oh, we can't do that, you're not allowed to do that. And we ask, well, where did you read that? Because that's not true. And so we've evolved a mythology past director to director to director that says, there are things that we shouldn't do. But let's just do the test of integrity. Is it a good idea? Does it make sense? Is the intent good for elevating governance? Well, of course, yes, it is. So inviting consultants, advisors, often diplomats, to join a nominations committee, to join a digital committee of a board, they don't have to be nominated by shareholders. They're like a guest presenter for a board meeting. And you enrich that board's knowledge without having to add another 4 chairs and 4 seats to a board tenure. So I think we're seeing it more and more simply because it makes good sense.
Now, Stephen, what are the other key takeaways that your study brought up?
I think one of the things that's important, and again, we really admire Malaysia invoking this. No one wants to hear the word, "you're going to be evaluated." Since we were children, we don't like that idea. And exactly. And you know, boards rightly are collections of leaders who have achieved superbly. They haven't got on their board because of their list of failures. And so now we get to that point where we're saying, no, we need to evaluate you. Well, why has only 25% of a board survey done an external evaluation? Well, one reason is it's not compulsory, but the other one is, why should we? And our industry until recently has let them down. How dare we come in and do a board evaluation which judges a board looking in the rearview mirror about what they've just been doing? It's unhelpful. We really don't learn too much, and it sets up an environment of judgment and therefore restraint. So we're moving and changing. So we're very proud at Russell Reynolds, we're pioneering moving from board reviews to board previews. It's still evaluating the board, but it's saying this idea of where is the board need to be tomorrow? And now how do we close the gap today? Even if today we're getting an A grade, it won't stay A grade with the face of change we're seeing. And so now we're encouraging people, do a board review to be a better board, to continue to get an A grade from all your stakeholders, but don't do a board review to find fault. It's unlikely to be helpful. So I think the attitude to board evaluations is changing. Very healthy in Malaysia. 98% of the respondents to the survey said we do board evaluations on ourselves. A quarter were doing them with external support, and of that quarter, 43% were doing them once every 4 to 5 years, 38% once every 2 to 3 years, and 19% doing external board evaluations every year. That's way above world best practice. So I'm keen to praise and elevate the start point, which is let's do evaluation on ourselves, not to find fault, but to make success deliberate.
Now, Stephen, final question. What are 3 things, and it could be more if you can share, what are 3 things that you would advise chairmen to do in order to get their boards ready for the future?
Yeah, it's a great question. 3 things. The first is to define that future. The chairmen that struggle see the future as an evolution of today's board. Let's find another really exciting, proven leader and bolt them on, and we'll continue to do that. So the first one is design that future. Where do we need to be? And now let's start developing, supporting, and building the board to be ready for that. The second thing is the concept of trust. And as I draw on our experience evaluating hundreds of boards for the point of view of helping them be better, one thing correlates to the effectiveness of a board way above everything else, and it's the presence of trust. That's trust between management and board, but primarily trust within the board. And we learned from our surveys that it's almost impossible for management to trust a board that didn't trust itself. So what is a chairman doing that promotes trust and protects trust, even above competence? So I think that's the same thing. So we've got projecting in the future, we've got projecting trust so that there is that flow of information and connection. And I think the third thing is about balancing diverse needs that a board has to face. One of the chairmen likes to call it, being a direct chairman is like another day in paradox. I need to be disruptive, and I need to be innovative, and I need to protect the core. I need to be external, and I need to be internal. I need to be thinking about tomorrow, but I need to be thinking about today. I need to think about society, and I need to think about, I actually need to live in those paradoxes and deliberately balance them. And I think it's the ability and the humility to do that. Those 3 things: projecting the future, driving trust and living in paradox seems to be an effective chairman driving an effective board.
Stephen, it's been a fascinating conversation. Thank you very much for taking your time to be on the Leadership Conversation show.
It's a pleasure. Thank you for inviting me. Enjoyed the conversation.
Now, I'm Brian Fernandez, and I've been speaking to Stephen Langdon, the Managing Director at Reynolds Associates, on Biztech's Leadership Conversation show. This video will be on our Facebook and LinkedIn sites, as well as our website, www.biztech.asia. Please like and subscribe to our various platforms. Thanks again for tuning in.